You know, whenever people talk about learning a new language, the verb system is usually the thing that completely terrifies them. But in this explainer, we're going to completely flip that script. We are decoding the Hebrew verbal system. And if you've ever felt totally overwhelmed by conjugations before, you're going to love this. We're going to demystify this whole thing and reveal it for what it truly is, a marvel of elegant logical engineering. Seriously, it's a system built on pure structural beauty, and once you see the architecture behind it, I promise you, it'll change the way you think about language itself. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this by grounding ourselves with a quick comparison. Think about a language like Spanish. It's a beautiful language, absolutely, but structurally, it has this sprawling, massive variety of verbal tenses and moods. You've got your past subjunctives, imperfects, pluperfects. It's literally a dense forest of conjugation. Now compare that to biblical and modern Hebrew. Hebrew operates fundamentally on just three main grammatical tenses. Just three! If you've ever waded through those endless verb charts in other languages, you know exactly what I mean when I say this tight, efficient structure is a massive breath of fresh air.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the logic of Hebrew. Second, the past via suffixes. Third, the present as a participle. Fourth, the future and possession. And finally, we'll wrap up with just how highly systematic this whole system is. It's a really satisfying rule of three progression that perfectly mirrors the logic of the language itself.
All right, part one, the logic of Hebrew.
So, the absolute most crucial thing to grasp here is that both modern and biblical Hebrew rely heavily on this magic number, 3. Instead of a dozen wild variations of time, the entire verbal machinery is built on just 3 main grammatical tenses. Now sure, they do have complementary forms, specifically the imperative for commands and infinitive forms, but the actual engine of time in Hebrew, it runs purely on those 3 cylinders.
Now, to understand how those 3 tenses actually function, we have to look at the absolute core component of the language. It's a concept called the shorsh. The shorsh is this fundamental 3-letter verbal root that serves as the base for constructing, well, pretty much everything. Think of the shorsh like a universal Lego block. It's just a brilliant piece of design. Literally all verbs in the language are built by taking this simple 3-letter base unit and just snapping tiny phonetic modifications onto it. That is the entire game. You find your root block and you snap your pieces on.
Which brings us to part 2, the past via suffixes. Let's see how this actually works.
To show you exactly how the past tense is engineered, we're going to isolate one specific Lego block, KTB. This specific 3-letter root carries the core conceptual meaning of to write. But right now, on its own, it's just raw potential. It's our starting block, just sitting there waiting for us to attach something to it to give it time and direction.
And this brilliantly illustrates the engineering of the past tense, also known as avar. To express that an action happened in the past, Hebrew simply takes suffixes and snaps them right onto the end of the shorish. These suffixes instantly communicate exactly who performed the action by flagging the person, gender, and number. So, for example, if we take our KTB root and snap an I sound onto the end, we get katafti, which means I wrote. Swap that ending out for an A sound and you get katafta, meaning you wrote. You see? You aren't learning entirely new, totally different words. You're just memorizing a few standard snap-on suffixes, attaching them to your 3-letter root, and boom, you have instantly built the past tense.
Moving right along to part 3, the present as a participle.
Now, the present tense, called convey, behaves completely differently from what we'd usually expect from a standard verb in English or Spanish. Unlike the past or the future, it basically just throws the whole concept of person out the window. It doesn't care at all if it's the first person speaking, the second person, or the third person. Instead, it functions way more like an adjective or a participle. It relies entirely on this highly efficient, simple 4-square grid based purely on the gender and number of the subject. So if any masculine person speaking in the singular is writing, whether that's I, you, or he, you just use the exact same form, kotev. If the subject is feminine singular, it's kotevet, and it's the exact same logic for the plural. Masculine plural is kotvim, and feminine plural is kotvot. That's the whole shebang. No massive complex conjugation charts for I am, you are, we are, they are. Just a brilliantly simple, adjective-like grid based on masculine, feminine, singular, and plural.
All right, part 4, the future and possession.
So remember how the past tense was constructed by snapping suffixes onto the back of our root block? Well, the future tense, atid, flips the script. It completely swaps the logic. The future is constructed primarily using prefixes. You literally snap them onto the front of the verbal root. And these prefixes are what mark the person performing that future action. For example, if you want to indicate the first person singular that I will do something in the future, you just snap the Hebrew letter aleph onto the front of the root. It creates this really wonderful, elegant structural symmetry in the language. Past modifications go on the back, and future modifications go on the front.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Hebrew uses this future tense to handle possession. Because here's the thing, Hebrew doesn't actually have a direct verb that simply translates to our English word to have. It just doesn't exist. Instead, to express future possession, or really future existence, the system utilizes the root haya, which fundamentally means to be or to exist.
And here's the mind-expanding twist I promised you. When you use this future tense to express possession, the verbal form has to obligatorily agree in gender and number with the object being possessed. It completely ignores the person who is actually speaking. Think about that for a second. In English, if I say, I will have a book, the whole verb structure revolves around I, the speaker. But in Hebrew, the grammar structurally revolves around the book itself. The existence of the object dictates the grammar, rather than the person claiming ownership of it. It's this dramatic structural difference that literally forces you to reorient exactly what is important in a sentence.
Which perfectly brings us to our final section, Part 5, a highly systematic system.
So, as we've explored, what could have been a sprawling mess of verbal conjugations is replaced by an incredibly efficient, logical framework. 3 tenses, 3-letter roots, snap-on suffixes for the past, a simple gender and number matrix for the present, snap-on prefixes for the future. It really is a triumph of linguistic engineering. But I want to leave you with a provocative thought, drawn directly from that fascinating quirk about future possession we just talked about. When you speak a language where the grammatical rules of possession are fundamentally forced to align with the object existing in the world and explicitly ignore the speaker claiming it, how does that shape the way a culture views ownership? When grammar diminishes the possessor and elevates the object's sheer existence in time, does it fundamentally change your perception of reality itself? It's an incredible thing to ponder, right? Structure isn't just rules, it's the lens through which we see the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.